Klein's book, Why We're Polarized. Is that too loud? No? Okay. Sure echoes this way. Good. Big time. I want to summarize Ezra Klein's book, Why We're Polarized, and have time for us to discuss your ideas and questions about the book afterwards. Like probably most of you, I've spent many, many hours over the last decade trying to decide how much my despair for America is justified. On some days, cautious optimism seems the more valid perspective. I've read an absurdly large number of political articles and opinion pieces, and often felt a lurking suspicion that I'm being at least somewhat propagandized by most writers and commentators. So the title of Ezra Klein's book intrigued me. Its reviews were largely good, and I hoped that reading it and giving this talk would give me much more knowledge and wisdom about what's causing the hurricane that we're in. Then I'd maybe find a place to stand back from today's bitter disputes and angry politics and see more clearly a hopeful path for the nation. By the end, you'll hear how that project has gone. Ezra Klein is a longtime outstanding political analyst and writer who has a classical liberal bent. He co-founded the Vox website and now provides articles and podcasts through the New York Times. Why We're Polarized is his first book, though. Let me say that summarizing this book has turned out to be quite a challenge. It's not long, but it's pretty dense, with a few dozen sociology and psychology studies explained, along with quite a few national surveys. Some might say it's repetitive, but I came to see it as the building of a wall of understanding, brick by brick. Many bricks look similar, but there are nuanced differences between them. Up front, Klein says, "What I seek is not a story, but a blueprint, a map to the machine that shapes political decisions." He believes the key to this is thoroughly understanding political identity. Political identity. What it is and how it is radically changed, and what forces are either affecting it or being shaped by its dramatic recent metamorphosis. Klein makes it very clear that he's not talking about identity politics, a term he sees as having been weaponized by conservatives to diminish the views and goals of marginalized people. Being a white person, a Republican, or a veteran is an identity just like being a lesbian or a Native American. A citizen's identity, though, is not a single thing. He says we have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Another key quote from him: "A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. That is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity runs so deep in our psyches and is activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage politically with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement." Being a native of Alabama and a history buff, I found the book's background section on how the two major parties changed in the 20th century fascinating. They went from being amazingly similar to each other in the 1950s to extremely different by the 1990s. Consider this 1959 comment by Richard Nixon. It would be a great tragedy if we had our two major political parties divide on what we would call a conservative liberal line. We have avoided generally violent swings in administrations from one extreme to the other. And the reason we have avoided that is that in both parties there has been room for a broad spectrum of opinion. Even as Nixon said that, the train of dramatic change was starting to rumble through American politics. It first began rolling when Truman integrated the military in 1959. It picked up speed after the Brown versus Board of Education decision and really began rattling walls as the civil rights movement gained momentum and national attention in 1960 to 1964. The watershed year, though, was 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was passed. After signing the bill into law, LBJ said in private, "I think we just delivered the South to the Republican Party for a long time to come." Truer words were never spoken. The extent of America's social safety net and the Vietnam War became the social safety net, and the Vietnam War became the major dividers. Soon after came women's rights, gay rights, the environment, abortion rights, government regulation. As the next 20 years went by, distrust between